really excited to go over this topic. It's from one of my favorite books in the Bible, the book of Job. And the question that we're going to try to answer today is, why did the innocent suffer? Okay, and that question is not just something where it's it's broader than that. Okay, why does bad things happen to good people, right? How come it seems like people who do wrong, everything still works out for them? Why is it that, this thing is happening, now this thing is happening? What's the purpose of this, right? And we get into those questions, we start questioning God and figuring out what's going on. So Job is an awesome book where we get to see firsthand somebody who is dealing with those questions and going through a lot of stuff that I'm glad I don't have to deal with. So for everybody that's watching on social media, welcome. My name is Joshua Miller here, a member here at Macedonia Baptist Church, and feel free to be active in the comment section. We got the comments going. We have Pastor Rick here who's going to be watching the questions, so be interactive. If you have anything you want to know more about, question, comments, throw it in, and feel free to join into the study today. All right, so everybody who got their Bible, let's go ahead and just open up to Job, because we're not going to be flipping around too much today. We're going to be really focusing in on that book. So the question that I posed earlier, right? Why did the innocent suffer? So this is something that there's 3 books in the Bible, the books of wisdom, that try to tackle that very question. And those 3 books you have are going to be Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. So to kind of start building off of the book of Job and where we're going to get to, is first got to get an understanding of what these wisdom books are trying to convey. Okay, so Proverbs, if we're just going to condense it down into a quick summary, is a book that basically is if you do this, then this will be the result, right? It's a very black and white style book, cause and effects, that shows that through the pursuit of wisdom, you'll be successful and righteous, and God will reward you. And if you're foolish and wicked, you will fail and be punished. Okay, and then the Proverbs has a whole array of different type of short little best practices, but that's the gist of it. Then you have Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes is a wisdom series where it's a sort of a criticism of Proverbs, where it says they're usually, you should live wise, you should pursue wisdom and, live righteously, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to work out, right? And, even through the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher that's referenced there says regularly that, hey, the race doesn't always go to the swift. Okay, so now we have one wisdom book that is like, hey, if you do this, this will always be the result. You have Ecclesiastes, which is like, hey, yeah, you should still do those things, but I've seen it where it hasn't always worked out for you. So now we're going to focus on Job and see how does that fit into this wisdom series here. So I want to open up with a question here. So what do we know about Job so far? What's been the stories that you've been, maybe you learned in church and Sunday school about Job's story?
Job was protected by God.
Okay.
He had a hedge around him. The devil said, I can't touch Job. You've protected him.
Okay. So good. So Job we have the devil attacking him and God was protecting him. So okay. So good. Anybody else?
To go further, take it to the Proverbs, Job, for the most part, followed everything in Proverbs. Job was a wise man. He loved God. He did good things. He always did the right thing. So to follow up your Proverbs thing, Job probably followed Proverbs. It's a best example of Job.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, any other thoughts?
God had a ton of faith in Job because God told Satan he could do anything he wanted to him except kill it. So God had a ton of faith that no matter what happened, Job would stay faithful.
Good. Very good. And
Job was an individual that God knew had integrity enough to be steadfast in what he was supposed to be doing and what he represented as being a man that was steadfast, a man that was immovable, a man that believed in God enough that he trusted God.
So good. These are all really good points, and a lot of that is found in the book of Job. And, one of the things that we're going to explore today is really understanding how Job is put together as far as the book itself, kind of the main themes that's going in there, and also want to propose or kind of point out some other themes that you can get out of Job. We have the one that is traditionally known as far as that he was trusted by God. We have the devil saying that, like, oh, I bet that if I did this to him, he would curse you to your face. And then Job was steadfast in where he was, and he ended up getting, his everything back and then some at the end of the story. But there's some other hidden gems in there that I want to make sure that we touch on today, and leave here with a better understanding about why there's suffering for the innocent. So, quick thing, history about Job. Job, he's a Gentile. He's a non-Israelite. Okay, he comes from this place that a lot of historians are not exactly sure where it is, the city of Uz, or however you want to say it, U-Z. And nobody's exactly sure where to pinpoint the date of when Job was written. Some people put it in the patriarchal period, some people do it pre-Moses. Reason why is because there's no mention of any laws or any stories that are traditionally found in the other Bibles in the Old Testament. So we have this character who is a non-Israelite, and he's living his life righteously. Like Dave said earlier, he's somebody who, if there was anybody who followed Proverbs to a T, it was Job. Okay? So the book is a book of poems. Okay? It starts off with a story about what happens to Job. Then it's a book of poetry that goes back and forth between a conversation with him and his friends. You got his friends in the Bible. In the book, you have Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu. Those are his friends who come and visit him, and they come to comfort him. But it becomes a theology and a philosophical debate. His friends are trying to help him by telling him that if he confesses his sins and does right by God, use the wisdom teachings, he can get everything back and then some. His friends represent the best of the wisdom teachers at that time and live their lives following Proverbs, that the black and white approach, that if you do this, this will be the result. And basically, if you're righteous and wise, everything will be blessed by God. If you're wicked and foolish, you will face God's judgment. So for them, when they come in and they're seeing Job and all this stuff that's happened to them, they're trying to comfort him, and it's kind of funny, but they're trying to comfort him by saying, well, if you just confess what you did wrong, everything will be okay. Right? And I know we've probably had some friends who try to comfort us, and it's not really comforting. You're like, okay, this is not really helping me out at all, right? And this is the meat and potatoes of Job. Most of Job is this conversation with his friends, just telling them, like, well, hey, all this stuff happened to you. Why don't you just confess that you did wrong? Job is arguing that I didn't do anything wrong. So that's something that is like I said, the meat of Job. All right, so now we got some understanding of where the book comes from, the kind of flow of the literature, and what we're going to expect when we get into this. Let's do some reading. So everybody got Job open? We're going to start at chapter 1, and we're going to read verses 6 through 12. So can I get somebody to read verses 6, 7, and 8? And then someone to read 9, 10, and someone else to read 11 and 12. We're going to spread the love.
Verse 6, 7, and 8?
Yes.
Okay. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and from in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and a upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil?
All right, thank you very much. So that was 6, 7, and 8. So can we get 9 and 10?
Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land.
Thank you very much. And then 11 and 12.
But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord.
All right, so this is a part of the story that we're all familiar with, right? We have this Satan character being a major hater, and is pointing out all the, that, well, he only loves you, God, because you do everything for him. You put this protective hedge around him. You take that away, I bet you that he'll change his tune. So God agrees to test Job, and at this point, I'd be wondering why, right? Because the beginning of Job, and even in just the section we read, God is bragging about Job's righteousness. He's saying that he's doing everything right. He's honoring God. He prays for his children. He's doing everything right. Going to church every Sunday, putting 10% in the collection plate, following God's word. God's bragging about that, so we know that it's true. Okay, so we don't need any other evidence that Job is a very righteous person. God said so. So I think we're all in agreement that if God said so, that we're just take that to the bank, right?
Yes.
So this still doesn't answer our question. Why would God do that? Like, why would God take somebody that he knows is 100% righteous, but then agrees to let Satan have his way with him? So what we do next is we focus on the Satan character. And we like to try to think, oh, that's why the suffering is going on there, because Satan wanted to get at him. He wanted to attack Job because he hates how Job is living. He hates seeing how righteous he is and hates hearing how God's bragging about him. Well, I want to take the focus away from that character, because Satan in Hebrew is adversary. Okay? And there's not a lot of context here to ID this as the Satan. It's just IDing that there's this adversary, this hater here that is trying to point out some issues with Job and trying to get God to see, like, hey, this guy's not as great as you think he is. So even if he is the Satan, he can't do anything without God's permission. Okay? So what I want us to do here is start to take the focus off of this devil Satan character that's just sitting there trying to make his life terrible, and put it to where the real conflict is in this story, and that's between Job and claiming his innocence and his righteousness and God's character. Okay, because the Satan character couldn't do anything unless God said, okay, go ahead, don't kill him, but go ahead. So question.
So you say without Satan, so I can't say this right. You said that let's take Satan away, the adversary, and concentrate on Job and God's relationship between Job and God, without Satan. Because Satan is the one stirring on the pot. He's the one that's causing all the trouble, this adversary.
So yeah, he is stirring the pot. Because you're pointing out there, he's saying like, well, God, you're bragging about this guy, but I'm not too sure. Like, I think we should test him out.
So he said, let's see what happens.
Yeah, like I bet you
your relationship with God, if God take the hedge around from him.
Yeah, then let's see what happens, right? At that point, God could very easily have just said, no, go away. He didn't do nothing wrong, right? But there's something about the book here that, we put the blame, and I'm not saying we're supposed to be blaming God, but we point it all to, there's this Satan character here, but then we end up missing another piece of the book and the story that is going to make itself evident later. So what I want everybody to do here, we're going through this process, is looking at it from the perspective of that, more so, not so much for why did this Satan character want to do this, but more so, why did God allow it to happen in the first place? Especially after he said this guy was innocent. Good question. Any other questions so far? Okay. All right, so To fast forward, what happens next is like the worst day that could ever happen to anybody. You know, Job, he ends up losing all his kids. They all die at once. He loses all his workers. To a raid. His crops gets destroyed. He loses his sheep. He goes from being one of the most respected, richest members of society to now a homeless, broken person. He's lost everything, all at one time. And his response is something that's really profound here, and that could be found in Job chapter 1, verses 20 through 22. And I'll read that part. So, at this point, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground worshiping and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And all this, Job did not charge God with wrongdoing. That's deep. I don't know about you guys, but if I lost everything that I held dear in one day, that'd be very hard to accept and to process the way that he did. And again, it shows how righteous this character is. Okay? So now he gets a second helping. Right? So you would think that would be the test. You done lost everything, and you still passed. So there's another, in chapter 2, we have another situation where that Job has to face another difficult situation. So we're going to go to Job chapter 2, sorry. I want somebody to read verses 3 through 6, and then somebody can grab verses 9 through 10.
And the Lord said unto Satan, hast you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him, to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life.
Thank you. And then 9 and 10.
Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. And he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips.
So this guy has an iron will, right? That is a true testament to his character, and again shows how God was 100% right in bragging about how awesome and righteous Job is. Okay, so he gets hit twice for no reason, right? And he still is not cursing and still worshiping God, still praising God and giving him the glory, even though now he's dealing with physical ailments, right? Really painful physical ailments, and his wife is not supporting him anymore. You know, and being a married man, you know, losing the support of my wife on top of everything else, that would be the nail in the coffin. Right? The fact that she just came out and told him that, hey, you need to just curse God and die, like that's kind of deep. You know, that's some deep emotional things he's dealing with, but he's still making a conscious choice to not curse God. So usually what ends up happening around this point, right? We praise that those two actions, how much he still is praising God, he's still worshiping God, he doesn't let nothing deter him, and then we skip the middle of the book and we go to the end and see, look, now he lives a long life, he gets all his children back, he gets the beautiful daughters, and everything turns out well. And that is a piece of the story you can get out of it, that hey, through endurance and through trusting God, then things will work out, right? Because that's when we talk about the wisdom series in the books of the Bible, that's the general story, that if you do this, this will be the result. But there's an emotional, spiritual building, relationship building roller coaster that Job has to go through first, that sometimes gets neglected in the middle of the book. So after this second time that he's afflicted, Job reaches what I like to call a faith threshold. So it's something that we all have, and it's all at varying limits depending on where we are in our spiritual journey and maturity, where that when things go wrong the first time, we're usually pretty good at saying, all right, God, I'm praising you still, you're in control, right?
Yeah.
Something goes wrong the second time. Okay, God, yeah, I still got you, believe in you, yes, we're going to do this. Third time, fourth time, fifth time. It gets to a point where we have a breaking point, where we hit the real emotional about how we truly feel about the situation, right? We make the conscious decision that, hey, God be praised, we're supposed to worship God, and I have to trust God above all else. But and we all have those different limits, and we've experienced it at different times, but when you have a compounding interest of bad things happening to you, you start to hit the point where the question, why, comes up. Why? God, why is this happening? What did I do wrong? Like, what puppy did I kick in a past life this is bringing this onto me, right? And what we start to see is Job does hit that point. The first two times he dealt with it, he's dealing with it as using his cognitive, his thought process, his brain, his wisdom, that, hey, the wisdom teaching shows that no matter what happens, you're supposed to still worship and praise God. And that's what he does. He's making a conscious choice. But then we start getting to his emotional reaction, and we start seeing that we all relate to Job in that way. Right? That Job, once you take away the wisdom, because right now his whole life has been based on this very proverb principle of, if I do this, this will be the result. And he's doing these things, but the results are not what the wisdom teaching is telling them. So now not only is he going to start questioning his whole life, right? All the time he's used, and at this point probably questioning wasted on trying to learn all these wisdom teachings. Now he's questioning the sole sovereignty and the justice of God. And this is what happens in the middle of the book. It all starts at chapter 3, verse 1. And I'll read that as verses 1 and 3, where he actually starts going into depression. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, a boy is conceived. Now we're starting to get a little real here, right? Tell us how you really feel, Job. Okay? Now the wisdom is gone, the cognitive, the thought process of like, oh, I should act this way. We all, and I say we all, I'm not going to assume we all, I'm going to say me. You know, I have, and if you relate to me, awesome. I have a brain that has a limiter in there, right? Where that is constantly regulating my emotions. Okay, you know, through all the training and going to school like for psychology and teaching, coaching and all this stuff, you learn how to control your emotions. Like, hey, I should not react this way in this situation. Okay, and that's what I relate to what Job is doing here, is that the first initial reaction, he's controlling himself very well, right? But when he starts getting to the point where his friends come along, and they're weeping with him, and they're sitting in silence for a while before we get the chapter 3 that we just read here. Now we're getting into the core of how he truly feels, because now he's reached that limit. So I'm going to pause. Any questions so far? Any thoughts?
So how, as a Christian, are we supposed to explain to non-Christians that God will basically use our life to prove a point? Because it's basically what this is. God using Job's life to prove a point to somebody who didn't believe. So, how as Christians do we relate to non-Christians that God can use my life and put me through what seems to be insufferable moments just to prove a point?
It's a very good question. Very, very good question. And it's something that, without spoiling the ending, I think will be answered a little later. But to answer it in a short way now, it's about God's character. And the more you understand about God's character and the attributes that we use to describe God, the more that you can swallow the pill about when these things happen to you. And the other part of it is that why isn't a question that we get an answer to? You know, when even if you talk about the New Testament with Jesus, they would ask him questions of why is this happening, or what does that mean? And there's one time when he would just tell them, it's not for you to know. Right?
Right.
And when it comes down to it with God's character, and I'll put it in perspective like this. So my son, I have a 5-year-old son, Asher, and he'll ask me for candy, right? Daddy, I want a sucker. I want a lollipop. I tell him no. How do you think he's responding to that? Not good, right? We when you've had children, you've experienced the like, what do you mean no? Like, you don't love me? Like, what is going on here? Like, if you love me, you would have gave me all this stuff.
You've given him suckers in the past.
Right.
And he expects when he asks you for one, that you will now say, but I didn't do anything. I wasn't bad or anything.
Yeah, I didn't do nothing wrong. Why can't I have one?
Why can I have a sucker now?
Yeah.
You gave me one before.
Right.
Why are the rules changed?
And that's exactly the point, right? If we put ourselves when, Jesus says, be like this, and he pointed to the youngest child, right? Let's think about that process. If that being like a child, being a child of God, there's times where God takes things away. There's times when he says yes, there's times when he says no. And we have the tendency to react in the way that my son reacts when I say, no, you can't have a sucker. Well, what did I do wrong? Like, you love me? Or are we there? Like, what? Why not? Why not? I can go into a very elaborate explanation as to why not, right? It's because you've already had one. If I give you this one, it's going to give you cavities. I'm trying to protect your mouth so that when you're 13, we don't have to go to get you braces, because it's going to make it really awkward. You're not going to be able to chew gum or eat taffy that you like doing. So I'm trying to save you 6 years of of teeth adjustments, so then you don't have to worry about the embarrassment and all that stuff that comes along with it.
And save mom and dad several $1,000s paying for 6 years.
Yes, that on top of that. Is he going to understand any of that? No. Because as an adult, we have a totally different level of conscious wisdom, understanding of chain reaction of results. So how much higher understanding or bigger view does God have of the same chain result in those same actions? Just to kind of put it in perspective.
I think a lot of times as adults, we come from kids and we go to adults, and we're so used to have certain things that we think, that's a part of what we should be like, for the rest of our life. In some cases, yeah, still a lot of times God will reject us just to show them that, in life, you don't get everything you want. At the time when you got to give, time you got to submit. In other words, God just lets you know that I know what's best for you. I know when to give it to you and how to give it to you. And sometimes you got to realize that a lot of times we want this and that. And next thing you know, we get it, and then we might say, well, Lord, I wish I had this, because it's causing us to create a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Now, but God knows when to give it to us, how to give it to us, and what we need. Even before we have it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, and I see handled, sometimes the worst thing that can happen is that we get exactly what we want. And the thing that we want to make sure that, as Christians and as we build our personal relationships with God, is that we have to understand that God's not a genie. Okay? It's the wisdom teaching we should live by, wisdom. We should seek wisdom. Proverbs is a very rich book and a lot of great things to learn and live by, right? But when you do what Job was doing before all this happened, what his friends are doing when they're going to try to comfort him, is they're trying to say like, oh, everything will be fixed if you just do this, because God is going to react to you doing these specific things. That's how he works. God is wise. He does justice. If you're doing right, the consequences are good. If you're doing bad, the consequences are bad. But we're seeing there's a glitch in the system here with this story with Job.
Well, yeah, through life, like Job's life,
Mm-hmm.
and I know people right now are in the hospital, very sick, and people say, you know, what did they do to deserve what they got? What do a child deserve? What does a child, how do you phrase it? Why do a child go through what they go through? Getting killed, getting hurt, for no reason. Kids in schools getting shot, for what reason? Getting killed. They didn't do nothing wrong.
Yeah.
They didn't do nothing wrong.
Exactly.
And there's people that I know, you know, they're human, and they've done some things wrong, but they're good people. Honestly, good people. I got a friend in the hospital right now, best friend I ever had. He's going through a whole lot of health issues. And his wife asked me, why? Why has God put him through that?
Yeah.
He didn't do nothing wrong.
Yeah. And what you said right there is hitting the nail on the head of what you know, when I was praying through this and you know, putting this together, why this was put together, right? Because God he hears those questions.
God.
Yeah, you start questioning. And you said something that was very powerful. They didn't deserve this. What if they did something, what would they have had to have done to deserve it?
Yeah.
You know, we have a cause and effect thought process. If this happened, it must be because of this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use what you said to tie into this next verse here, because his friends start coming to him with that logic. In fact, what they start doing, and I'll just read this. This is Job chapter 22, verses 4 and 11. What they start doing is that they start filling in the gaps. Oh, you had to have done something wrong, right? And the whole book is a back and forth from Eliphaz, and then Job responds to him. Then Bildad, and Job responds to him. And it starts off like friendly, you know, like, well, you know, Job is pleading his innocence. His friends are saying, well, you can't be innocent because this is happening to you. Then he's like, no, guys, for real, I'm innocent. And they're like, nah, if you were innocent, this wouldn't be happening. And then it gets more emotional, gets more heated. So this is an example of how one of his friends starts trying to figure out, well, what did you do to deserve this? And they start making up stories. And we know it's made up because God said that Job is what? Righteous. So, Job 22, verses 4 through 11. Is it for your, and I'm reading from the NIV. Is it for your piety that he rebukes you and brings charges against you? Is natural wickedness great? Are natural sins endless? You demanded security from your relatives for no reason. You stripped people of their clothing, leaving them naked. You gave no water to the weary, and you withheld food from the hungry. Though you were a powerful man, owning land, and honored man, living on it, you sent widows away empty-handed and broke the strength of the faithless. That is why snares are all around you, why sudden peril terrifies you, why is it so dark that you cannot see, and why the flood of waters cover you. Wow, what a friend. We're friends like that, right?
Right.
So, he basically takes Job's character and drags it through the mud. All because of the black and white approach that if bad things happen to you, it's because you did something bad. Right? When you think about Jesus when he was healing and doing his ministry, before he healed people, what was the first thing he said to them? He said, your sins are forgiven. Now, the person coming to him, I'm pretty sure was just trying to get healed. Right? But he said your sins are forgiven, because you got to think about, and you know, you may be able to relate, but in the Hebrew culture, right, this was a very hard-driven thing, that bad things happen to bad people. If you are a leaper, right, and according to the law, it was because you did something,
Yeah.
right? If you were born, yeah, you did something.
Somebody sinned, yeah.
Yeah, if you were born blind, your parents did something, right? So you got these people their whole lives thinking that that what happened to them is because they did something wrong. Think about that for a second. Maybe some of you can relate. I know I can. You know, that's one of the things that kept me from even being up here today preaching and talking about the Word of God with you, is an internal struggle with that I'm not good enough. And you have these people their whole lives thinking, I'm not good enough because I can't see, because I'm a leaper. And for Jesus to say, your sins forgiven you, that's something they've never heard before.
But as Christians in today's church, because all we talk about are the miracles and the blessings, and all we talk about is how God gave us the house and God gave us the car and God healed this and God healed that, aren't we presenting a false narrative to the world? Because if the only thing we ever talk about is all the good things God does, that's the only thing they know Him as. So when something bad happens, because the church has never been transparent enough to be honest about the fact that I've had some dark times in my life and they were God ordained, not because I did anything wrong, just because God wanted to stretch my faith or grow my patience or whatever, deal with, help my long suffering, because we don't talk about those. Aren't we giving the world a false narrative that God only does good things?
Yes. And I said a short yes because 145% yes. You have the prosperity preachers, right? If you put $500 in a collection plate, you got the preachers that, I'm not gonna call them out, but the certain preacher in Texas that is like everything's sunshine and rainbows and God's just up there smiling, and if you believe in God, everything's always going to work out, and you have this version of God, and it's only focusing on one aspect of His character. So somebody give me a word that you would describe yourself that's appropriate, Mike. Somebody give me a word, something that you would use to describe yourself, whether that's funny, intelligent, something.
Articulate.
Articulate, okay.
Clever.
Clever. Give me one more.
Nice.
Nice, okay. Now imagine whatever the word that you have in your head, even if you didn't say it, I want you to still think about that one word. What if everybody you ever knew only engaged with you according to that one word? So your family, your friends, your work, well, y'all don't work, so y'all pointed that out to them. So, okay, I got one, all right, yeah, because
Communicate with others.
yes. But imagine somebody talking to you and they only interact with you and they only do it based off of your cleverness. They only do it based off of you being nice. They only talk to you about how you articulate yourself. And they only talk to you and they use big words and they use this vernacular and that's it. Does that sound like a healthy relationship?
No, almost certainly not. Because the kind person, the people that they think are kind, he can be used.
He can be used.
Yes. If this guy is always kind to us, I can get away with anything.
Interesting. Nice guys finish last, right?
Right. Or the guy that thinks he's so clever, he'll never see this one coming.
So then they try to pull one over on you.
Yeah,
He thinks he's so smart.
Right.
Let me show him. Or maybe even a little bit worse than that is that they take nothing you do as face value. They always are skeptical of you and they don't trust you.
Right. And the person that's articulate, for example, he doesn't talk. He talks down to me all the time.
So kind of say, so
Big words.
yeah, like I gotta walk around with thesaurus talking to this guy. Like, what the heck are you talking about, right? So you guys all have that one word, and you start thinking about all the different relationships you have, and only doing that according to that one word. And that's exactly where was touched on with Pastor Rick explaining about, how we push that God's this, this one aspect of God. And that's what's going on in this book with Job, is that Job's whole life is based off of the one attribute of God, which is God is a God of justice. If you do this, here's the consequences.
Well, you're right. But there's another side of God, and that's the God of wrath. So a lot of people always want to put God in the box and say, well, most people might say, well, you're supposed to be love. Like I just said, Joe, all things you're supposed to be kind, you're supposed to be happy all the time. But there are times, when God has to show you things and bring you to grips of certain things, and it might not be what you might, want to, hear from God, or you might not. It might not be what you want God to reveal to you, but God, has a way of doing things in His own image. He's a God of love and He's a God of wrath also.
Yeah, there's a lot of different attributes. Like everyone here in this room, your personality is very complex, right? You all have different priorities, different value systems, right? There's certain things that make you laugh, that make somebody else, they wouldn't get it. We all have these different attributes, and that's what makes relationships amongst ourselves so amazing, right? And as the Christian and the church community, we should be helping people build and foster that with God, right? God uses, when Jesus is explaining the relationship between Him and the church, right? He uses very powerful language, right? The bride and the bridegroom, right? This newlywed couple, okay? And for those who are married or were married, that first, oh man, we're married. There's like that excitement. There's just that love there, right? He even uses relationships to describe between us and God with, the father and the son, right? Parents and the children. And this is something that's, when we talk about Job, and why I really love this book, is because Job starts getting real, right? His emotional roller coaster is something that we can all relate to at some point. And the emotional roller coaster that he's having is, one of the main reasons is because he's only been approaching his relationship by the one attribute that he knows.
Right.
So that limit that he's putting on that relationship, can we really say that he has a healthy relationship with God? See, God was pointing out that the guy is righteous. He's saying that the guy is righteous, which means that the justice and everything that's going on with him is right, because that's how he has had his relationship with God. So let's move on a little bit here, because now we have this back and forth, right? Job is sitting there talking to his friends. His friends are saying, making up stuff. He's saying, no, I'm innocent. The whole time, the youngest of the friends, Elihu, is sitting back waiting. Now, you guys, when it comes to this time period, the youngest, the junior, didn't speak up against the elders. Okay, we gotta make sure we understand that. The junior sat quietly and was always there to observe and learn from the elders. Wasn't supposed to speak up against them or really say much of anything unless he's agreeing with something the elder says. So you have Job, his three friends, the elders, having this conversation, this debate. Elihu says nothing until chapter 35. It's a long time. Okay? So, Elihu, chapter 35, verse 4, says, I would like to reply to you and to your friends with you. Look up at the heavens and see. Gaze at the clouds so high above you. If you sin, how does that affect him? Meaning God. if your sins are many, what does that do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness only affects humans like yourself, and the righteousness only other people. So Elihu, when he's responding to the group, he is summing it up by saying, guys, I've been sitting here listening, and he spends like at least half of the first time he's speaking apologizing. Like, guys, I'm so sorry. Like, I know this is kind of weird, but I got to say this. Please allow me to speak. Be patient with me. He's being very respectful, and he's basically telling them that, guys, this viewpoint that you have about God is not right. You're limiting what you're doing, and he's also going after Job, saying you are holding this righteousness that you have so high up that you think that this is doing God a favor. Because Job, through the whole book, is saying, but I'm the righteous one. Like, I'm the righteous one. I didn't do anything wrong. And Elihu's like, wait, even if you didn't do anything wrong, that's not doing God a favor. You can't be sitting there questioning what God is doing. Right? And he talks to the other friends too, that you guys in your righteousness and your wisdom think that you know all this stuff, but you don't. So, at this point, Job is fed up talking to his friends, right? But it makes you wonder, and how many of us do that, where that when something goes wrong, we talk to everybody else about the problem except for the person we need to talk to. We talk to everybody else about the problem before we pray about it. And that's what Job did. He talked to all his friends, had this argument. I don't know how much time it took for them to do that before he finally gets to the point where he's like, you know what? I'm taking this up with God. I'm taking my case to God. So he does just that. He takes his case to God, and you go through to chapters 35 through 41. After Elihu speaks, you have this conversation where Job is pleading his case. I did this right. I'm do this. Like, how did you do this to me? He starts questioning, throughout the whole book, he's questioning God's motives, right? Are you a God of justice? How can you be a God of justice when I've done this, and that, and other? So he's at this point now where I said, Job, show us how you really feel.
Yeah.
Now we see how Job really feels, right? And, is this different from anybody else's viewpoint that they had at Job? Because I know that traditionally they show Job as this upright, righteous, emotionally controlled person.
Yeah.
Until you read the rest of the book, you're like, whoa, this guy, he kind of went at God a little raw here. Because he kind of overstepping his boundary. What's going on? But the thing is that a healthy thing about this, though, is that he's being real with God. God already knew how he really felt. And that's something I, challenge with you guys as well. It's like God already knows how you really feel about the situation. It does you no good to try and not be real with God when you're praying with him and having that conversation. Now, and I see your hand here. You definitely want to make sure you're being respectful and not going off on God like how Job was doing. But there is something positive about him finally opening up his soul and his spirit to God and building that relationship.
So, because of the way Job approached God, was he sinning? Because earlier, the Bible says Job hadn't sinned in his heart or hadn't sinned with his lips. Job is having a meltdown, a pure bona fide temper tantrum. Was he sinning when he did it?
That's a very great question. When you think about sin, right, in the Hebrew, when you break it down, it basically goes to fail, right? When you sin, you have failed at something here. So when you read through Job, at the beginning, it does say, he didn't sin in what he said. This is 100% true. It doesn't state in the book later that he sinned by approaching God this way. If anything, it shows that God wanted him to be real with him, because this is the first time after Job goes to God that God responds. See, when Job said what he did, and he said praise be to God, he followed the wisdom teachings. He did this stuff. He followed the law. He did what he was supposed to do. Even when things went bad, he still didn't curse God. He did not sin. He did not fail in that structure that was built out there. But we don't have God responding to him in that moment. We have God responding to him when he finally goes to God directly and has that conversation and that real relationship conversation with him. So, in Job, if there was a sin or something associated with that piece, I think it would have been listed in there at that point where God said, like, hey, you done messed up now. All right? You need to go sit down somewhere. But we don't see that happen. What we see is that Job pleads his case, and then we have God responds. And he responds in a different way. He responds in a way where he goes through and he starts asking Job questions. Well, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I put the stars in the sky? Do you understand and he starts asking all these questions about the mating rituals of deer, and he starts asking him all these questions that Job does not have answers to. Right? God starts asking him these questions that, like, who are you to question me? You're asking me these questions, but you can't even answer these questions I'm asking you. Would you like to run? He even gives him, like, would you like to run the universe according to the strict laws of justice? Because if that's the case, this would be an empty sanctuary. If God only ran the world by justice, we wouldn't even have Genesis 3 done. Right?
Right.
Because God would have been 100% just that when Adam and Eve sinned, like, oh, you know what? Let's just wipe that whiteboard clean, start over. That was a fail. That would have been completely just, right? He would have been completely just when Moses came down off Mount Sinai and they were already worshiping, breaking the first two laws of the first commandments, right? He would have been just wiping them off the place, wiping off David and his whole family line after, he went and had his friend killed because he wanted his wife. There's a lot of things that we should not be here for if God was only according to justice. So, let's see our time here. I'm going to skip here a little bit. So God finally responds to questions. And when he responds, Job repents. And then God also says, and tell your boys too that they're wrong. And they also have to sacrifice, so they do a sacrifice and repent and give back to God. So God never answers Job's questions, though. He never tells him why I did it, right? And that's something that we would like to know. Why did you do that? He doesn't answer. The book ends with Job getting everything back, but it doesn't say he got everything back because he did this, that, and other. He just gets everything back, and that looks like that was just done out of God's graciousness and just as a gift. But the book does not end with, this is why things happen. So then you have to look at the whole story of the Bible. Well, what changed then in that book, right? So if these things happen, maybe we can figure out some whys from there. So let's look at some things that's changed since Job lost everything. So first, Job and his friends learned a lesson, right? They get a humbling experience. Job's case pushed their wisdom to the limits and showed they had a limited view of God. So you think about, the higher you are, the heavier the humbling experience. Remember, these are the guys who were at the top of the class, the wisest of the wise. Everybody went to them for their answers. All of them, through Job's experience, had a huge humbling experience. They're like, wow, we really don't know as much as we thought we did. So that's one thing. Another thing, Elihu, he found his voice and spoke up against his elders. Remember, this is a huge deal. This does not happen. That can be seen as very disrespectful, right? But the fact that the younger, right, was able to correct the elders, that's a big deal. And that's something that's even pushed in, taught with Jesus, right? The first shall become last, the least shall become the greatest, right? This is something that kind of ties into that. We have Job, who has another humbling experience where he realized, and when you read the book, you see that he realizes that he's been holding on to his righteousness like he's doing God a favor, like it's a badge of honor. The other thing that is a positive is that Job took his case to God and had a real conversation with God. He had a real prayer with God. He didn't have the I should pray this way and I have to do things this way. he was finally real for the first time that we can put together in the book with God and had that conversation. So again, there's no answer to why the innocent suffered, right? So if you just come here for an answer, sorry for the bait and switch, I don't have one for you. But but there's something here that I want to make sure that we leave with today, right? So we're going to go back when we talk about that attribute, that one character or trait of you, right? And how limiting your relationships would be if everybody treated you to only that one attribute, okay? And to answer the question, why did the innocent suffer? It's, we don't know, and that's okay. We don't have to know. There doesn't have to be a reason that we understand. The same way with my son, he's never going to, at his age, he is not going to understand the full reason as to why he can't have that lollipop. Where we are, no matter how far science takes us, no matter how much we think we know, God has an indefinite higher viewpoint of what's going on. The thing is that Job, the book of Job, what we need to walk away from is not just that God can reward you and can give you everything back that was taken away, but that we have to trust